Media organizations are calling for the withdrawal of the SABC Bill. There are suggestions that the bill is an initiative of the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies and is aimed at creating a second SABC with its board appointed by the minister. Let's understand what the reservations are around this bill and bring in the head of programs and media monitoring Africa, Thandi Smith. Thandi, thank you for making time for us this afternoon. Why do you believe this bill is flawed?
Hi, good afternoon, Clement. So for us, the entire bill, the entire process, the entire way it's drafted, every proposal that we see coming through is simply unconstitutional. It's flawed in the proposals that it makes, the models that it puts forward. We'll get into the specifics about some of the bigger issues. But the bill as it is right now simply needs to be scrapped and gone back to the drawing board. It comes in at a time where there are multiple other policy processes taking place, and it seems to be completely sidestepping the existing policy processes and coming out with a SABC bill that is trying to build on the Broadcasting Act. And it's simply at odds with any other kind of proposal that has been put forward in other legislation. It's confusing. We are at odds with simply why or how this bill is in the condition that it is in. And as I mentioned, the entire process has been flawed. The current draft that we see before Parliament was a draft that was not even put out for public comment. The draft before that in 2021 was put out for public comment. And this current draft has none of the submissions made by organizations in it. It's entirely different to the initial draft that we saw. And there are big issues with it.
What is the Department of Communications intending this bill for? What's their justification?
Well, we are asking ourselves that very question. We do need policy and regulations, particularly around the SABC, that bring it into a time where we are looking at convergence in terms of media, news, audiovisual services. We do need updated policies. We need updated regulations around funding models. We need updated regulations around how to bring the public broadcast in line with other best practice regulation. And for that, we also have seen the draft white paper on audio and audiovisual content services. And so you can understand why we need proposed regulations and regulations specific to a public broadcaster, because we know that a public broadcaster is an absolute cornerstone of any democracy. One of the first structures to fall when you are trying to destabilize a democracy is the public broadcaster. And so we need to see a functional institution. But this current draft of the bill is completely contradictory to those points.
What does the bill say about the funding model of the SABC? Because this is an entity that's been plagued by years of financial instability.
Yes, we have seen massive financial crises at the SABC over the decades. And what this bill seems to propose is a cross-subsidization model, which we have seen attempts to implement, which has been proposed, which has been tried, and we have seen it fail. So what we see is a proposal for something that is known to not be a functional way forward. We also see the bill suggesting that for now they propose the cross-subsidization model, but that there should be a 3-year plan for proposed research into new funding models. In 3 years, we're going to be in an entirely different era and situation. And so that's just simply not feasible to give it yet another 3 years where we have seen other funding models being proposed by the previous board. We have seen work being done on these funding models. So for the department to now come through and say, okay, well, we proposed the cross-subsidization, which we know has failed, which is why we're in the financial crisis we are in with the SABC, and let's give it another 3 years. That's simply ludicrous.
Has the TV license fee collection model worked? Is that still being considered?
It's part of the funding models that need to be relooked, and we need to be properly investigated and look at other sort of best practice models globally around what best methods to fund a public broadcaster are. I think there's been a lot of controversy around, the TV licenses and how we fund the public broadcaster, but, we need to kind of take a step back and go, we do need the public broadcaster. I don't think it's a question whether we need it or not. And part of having a public broadcaster means that that model is public funded. And it's about how to best go around having that element of public funding to the broadcast. And so no, we know that the TV license model in its own is unsuccessful as well, which is also why we find ourselves in the situation we're in. But so, having said that, we do need to find alternatives to be able to ensure that there is a public funding element that goes into the SABC.
Mm-hmm. So to avoid like the last minute bailouts that we have seen in the past, the SABC is going to need a stable revenue stream. What proposals have been made out there by other stakeholders on how it can have that sustainable revenue stream?
Well, we do know that some of what should go into funding in the SABC is government. So we do need a government-supported, parliament-supported SABC. So I think just taking a step back, one specific revenue model is not going to work. There does need to be, different types of revenue coming into the SABC. So it has to be a sort of a cross-structured model. And one of those elements that we as MMA and SOS and others have been calling for over the last couple of years has also been a setup of a local content fund to fund the public mandate. We know the commercial elements of SABC get their funding from advertising and local content, and that's the commercial aspect. We need to find alternative models to fund the public mandate of the SABC, and that's where it's becoming tricky, and that's where we see this proposal of the cross-subsidization, which we know doesn't work.
Yeah. There are those who believe that this bill raises red flags regarding the interference by government in the commercial and operational aspects of the SABC. Is that a valid concern? And how do you guarantee editorial independence?
It's an absolutely valid concern. It's something that goes against massive progressive strides made over the last few years around securing editorial independence and board independence. There was a case a few years ago, the Motajani judgment, around separating the powers of the minister to the SABC board, and it was declared very clearly that there should not be ministerial interference in the functionings of a board. And we see this bill proposing a model just like that again, where we know that it's unconstitutional. And so what we see as a proposed method in this current form is setting up a second board at the SABC to look at the public funding, the public mandate issues, which is essentially implementing two governance structures into the same institution to run differently. And to us, that speaks of two SABCs, essentially. If you have two boards, you have two different structures. And if that board of the public mandate, the public content, is going to be one that is overseen and interfered with by the minister, that is direct ministerial interference. That is direct government interference into those operations. We also see another proposal around converging the head of news and the CEO, I think, one of the CEO position, and having one position. That takes us directly back to the Thandi Smith era, where there was, again, a very easy way to have direct ministerial interference in content. And that is unbelievably dangerous. And again, you have to ask yourself, why at this point, just before a national election, do we see a bill being proposed that will fundamentally change how the SABC operates and enable ministerial interference into news content?
So the bill was out for public comment. Where's that process now?
So the bill was out for public comment, and there were submissions made on the bill, and it went back to the department. The current form that we see was changed. More submissions more drafts were done, and so this version went directly from the department to Parliament, which, given that is such a fundamentally different bill to what we saw in 2021, should have gone back out for public comment, which it didn't do. So that's already a unconstitutional point in the process. So what we are calling for is that Parliament now sends the bill back to the departments to be revised and redrawn. It should be scrapped in its entirety, but it is now sitting with Parliament, and it is Parliament's decision to then either send it back or call for public submissions as well.